They laughed at him over dinner, mocked his kindness, called his dreams worthless. But what the billionaire Langford family didn't know was this: the man they humiliated wasn't just any actor. He was Keanu Reeves. 3 months later, he bought their company for pennies. But buried in old files was a secret that changed everything. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. Keanu Reeves wasn't expecting the envelope. He'd arrived in the late afternoon, hand-delivered by a man in a navy suit with no name tag and a black car idling outside. The envelope was thick, gold-edged, and heavy in his hand. It didn't feel like a typical invitation. It felt like a message from another world. Keanu sat in his modest office, surrounded by walls of hand-drawn storyboards, student film reels, and faded photos of community theater groups. The scent of incense lingered in the air, and a vinyl record hummed softly from a corner speaker. Everything about the room felt grounded, worn in, real. He turned the envelope over. The seal was wax, dark crimson, pressed with a crest he hadn't seen in over a decade. The intertwined L and V of the Langford family. Vermilion pictures. His eyes narrowed. He broke the seal carefully, pulling out the invitation. Thick cardstock. Calligraphy lettering. You are cordially invited to a private dinner with the Langford family, Friday at 8 p.m., Penthouse Residence, 721 Fifth Avenue, New York City. Formal attire requested, RSVP appreciated. No signature, no explanation, just a time and place. Keanu stared at it for a moment longer, then set it on the desk. He didn't move. He didn't blink. He just breathed. The Langfords, billionaire media royalty, owners of a sprawling entertainment empire that included TV networks, publishing houses, and the once prestigious Vermilion Pictures, a studio that had backed some of the finest films of the late 20th century before fading into corporate stagnation. And now, out of nowhere, they wanted dinner. May entered the room, holding a tablet and a half-empty iced tea. She paused when she saw the invitation on the desk. "Is that what I think it is?" she asked. Keanu nodded slowly. "Langfords," he said. May put the tablet down and crossed her arms. "They haven't returned your emails in 2 years. They turned down your proposal for Vision Circle 5 times. Now they want dinner? Apparently. You're not going." Keanu looked at her with a quiet smile. Bailey finally reached out, May. "It could be a sign. Maybe they want to talk funding." "Deadly want to talk power," she shot back. "Keanu, these people don't just hand out second chances. They trap you in a gold cage and laugh while you thank them for it." "I'm not going in as a beggar," he said calmly. "Vision Circle needs a patron, a serious one. I can't ignore the opportunity." "Bailey ignored you." "I know." "They called your students hobbyists in the press." "I know." May leaned forward. "Keanu, please. You've spent your whole life building something that actually matters. You've made something real. These people, they crush real things for sport." He was quiet for a long moment. "Maybe," he said, "or maybe they've changed." May scoffed. "They don't change. They just smile more while they break your back." Keanu turned toward the window. Outside, the city stretched like a living tapestry. It was dusk, and the world had taken on that strange, intermedial glow, half shadow, half light. "If there's even a 1% chance they're willing to fund Vision Circle," he said softly, "I have to try. Not for me, for the kids we haven't met yet, for the ones no one's looking for." May shook her head but didn't argue. She knew that look. Keanu wasn't going to be stopped. He stood up and glanced at the calendar. Friday, 3 days away. "Call my tailor," he said. "Tell him I need the charcoal suit pressed and ready by Thursday." May frowned. "You're really going?" I'm not doing it for them." He picked up the invitation and slipped it into his jacket. "I'm doing it for the stories waiting to be told." Friday came with a quiet intensity. The city moved like it always did, fast, impatient, loud, but Keanu felt detached from it all. In the back of a modest black sedan, he watched the streets blur past, every corner a memory. He didn't speak much. May had offered to accompany him, but he declined. This was something he had to face alone. The invitation had said formal, but Keanu had chosen the path of restraint. His charcoal suit was perfectly tailored but understated, paired with a black tie and polished shoes. He wore no cufflinks, no flash of wealth, just dignity. As the car pulled up to the glass canopy of 721 Fifth Avenue, the doorman gave a small bow and opened the door with practiced elegance. Keanu stepped out, his posture calm, his eyes scanning the glowing facade of the skyscraper. Inside, everything gleamed. Marble, gold trim, glass chandeliers. A young concierge greeted him by name before he could even speak. "Mr. Reeves, they're expecting you. The elevator is reserved, penthouse level." Keanu nodded politely and stepped inside the waiting elevator. As the doors closed, he exhaled slowly, grounding himself. The ascent was smooth, too smooth, almost eerie. No soft music, just silence. And when the elevator finally stopped, it opened into another world. The Langford penthouse wasn't just luxurious, it was surreal. A sprawling space with high ceilings, sweeping views of Central Park, and walls lined with abstract art that looked like it belonged in a museum more than a home. Everything reeked of power, from the scent of rare incense to the echo of his footsteps on polished floors. A butler approached. "This way, Mr. Reeves." He was led through a marble corridor and into the formal dining room. A long mahogany table stretched the length of the room, set with crystal glassware, bone china, and ornate silver cutlery. The table was already partially occupied. 4 people sat at the far end, dressed like royalty. Keanu recognized them instantly. Victor Langford, the family patriarch, silver-haired and shark-eyed, with a half-smile that never reached his eyes. Colette Langford, the matriarch, elegant in emerald, fingers heavy with diamonds, her gaze unreadable. Their children, Julian and Francesca, both in their early 40s, both polished to perfection, both known in the industry for being as ruthless as they were charming. Victor stood as Keanu approached. "Keanu, you look comfortable?" Keanu didn't flinch. "Thank you for the invitation." Victor gestured toward the empty seat. "We've been meaning to reconnect." Keanu sat, keeping his back straight, hands resting calmly on the tablecloth. He didn't reach for the wine that was poured. He didn't comment on the view. He waited. Francesca leaned in. "Still working with the underprivileged?" Julian chuckled under his breath. Keanu's face didn't change. "I'm working with future storytellers. They just haven't had a stage yet." Victor lifted his glass. "Well, tonight, perhaps, we can change that." The clink of crystal echoed through the silence. And just like that, the meal began. The first course arrived. Artful, delicate, absurdly expensive. But Keanu barely touched it. Instead, he listened. The conversation flowed like expensive wine. Francesca spoke of new acquisitions. Julian boasted about Vermilion's streaming pivot. Colette asked about a scandal in Monaco as if it were theater. Victor, ever the orchestrator, let them speak before steering the tone back toward business. "We've been watching your work, Keanu," he finally said, swirling the wine in his glass. "Vision circle. Very noble." Keanu met his gaze. "It's necessary." Julian leaned back, fingers steepled. "And expensive? I don't do it for profit." Victor smiled, thin and cool. "That's what makes you interesting." There it was. Not praise, curiosity. Keanu felt the weight of it. "You said you've been watching. Then you know what we're building," Keanu said calmly. We take kids from forgotten zip codes and give them cameras, scripts, tools, and more than that, we give them a voice. Colette raised an eyebrow. And what would you need from us? Keanu answered without hesitation. $1 million to fund 3 new hubs. No ownership, no branding, just backing. Julian laughed. You think we give money away for free? No, Keanu replied. But maybe you give it away for legacy. Victor looked at him then, not through him, but at him, as if something about the words struck a nerve. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was surgical. Then Victor smiled again, wider this time. Let's eat. And just like that, the conversation shifted back to safe topics. But Keanu knew what had really begun. This wasn't a dinner, it was a test. And the first move had just been made. The next course arrived with silver domes and silent precision. The butler lifted each lid like a magician, revealing a trick. Beneath the steam, dishes too intricate to pronounce shimmered with edible gold leaf. No one touched the food right away. The real feast was the conversation. Victor tilted his head. Keanu, I want you to meet the rest of the family. From the far end of the room, 3 new figures emerged. Richard Langford entered first, Victor's older brother and the family's original kingmaker. Though retired from the public eye, he still held court with the quiet arrogance of a man who had never been told no. His gait was slow but deliberate, cane in one hand, bourbon in the other. Behind him came Miranda Langford, tall and striking, with high cheekbones and a stare like glass. She wore a silver dress that whispered with every step, and her lips curled into a smirk the moment she saw Keanu. Last was Colin Langford, the youngest, with slicked-back hair and the oily confidence of a man who had inherited too much too early. He wore a designer tux with sneakers, like he wanted to be edgy but still accepted. Keanu Reeves, Richard said, lowering himself into a chair with the weight of authority. You haven't aged poorly. Keanu nodded with calm grace. Thank you, you look well. Miranda leaned on her elbow, chin in her hand, examining him like a museum piece. Still living like a monk with a movie camera? A few polite chuckles rippled down the table. Keanu didn't respond. I saw a photo of your apartment, Colin added. Was that a second-hand futon in the corner, or just part of the aesthetic? Julian raised a glass. Keanu's always been consistent, integrity over comfort. Francesca laughed. Or just poor taste. Keanu picked up his water glass, letting their voices roll past him like fog. He didn't flinch, didn't play into their rhythm. Victor gestured to the center of the table. Keanu's building something called Vision Circle, he said, tone dry. An academy for future, tours? Colin raised an eyebrow. Oh, like a daycare for kids with iPhones. Miranda smiled. How sweet. It's not a charity, Keanu said, evenly. It's a place to give voice to those who don't get auditions, agents, or legacy deals. It's for the ones no one ever sees. Richard leaned forward. And what will they do with that voice? Make movies about broken sidewalks and sad sandwiches? More laughter. Keanu met his gaze. Maybe. But at least it'll be honest. That silenced the table for a beat. Just a beat. Then Colin clapped slowly. Touche. Keanu set down his glass. Is that why I'm here? To be evaluated? Victor grinned. No, of course not. We simply wanted to catch up. But something in his eyes betrayed the truth. Keanu looked at the empty plate in front of him. Something was coming. He could feel it. The third course was served, a deconstructed lamb dish with lavender foam and truffle pearls. No one ate. They were too busy circling him. So tell us, Miranda said, her voice soft but lined with barbs. What's the big dream now? Another black and white indie about fatherless kids and broken dreams? Francesca sipped her wine. I saw his last piece. What was it called? Concrete Wings? It felt like watching someone journal in real time. Vision circle, Cullen said, returning to the earlier subject. Sounds like a noble waste of money. I mean, why train someone who'll never get in the room? Maybe we change who owns the room, Keanu answered. Richard gave a slow shake of the head. You know, Keanu, he said, I used to think you were a quiet genius. Then I realized you're just quiet. There was a pause. It wasn't the insult itself that hit hardest. It was the satisfaction on their faces as it landed. A shared smirk. Like they'd planned this. Victor leaned back. We like you, Keanu. You're earnest. Unthreatening. You remind people of decency without actually changing anything. Is that what you think this is? Keanu asked, voice level. A safe vanity project? Miranda replied before anyone else could. Oh no, I think it's a lovely fantasy, like believing one voice in a crowd can rewrite an empire. Colin pulled something from beneath the table, a manila folder. He placed it in front of Keanu with an almost theatrical flair. We didn't invite you here for dinner, he said. We invited you for closure. Keanu opened the folder slowly. Inside was a signed contract. Blackgate Studios, an agreement granting them exclusive rights to a pitch package. His pitch package. The one he'd submitted 6 months ago to a confidential investor. His breath caught. We own the rights now, Julian said casually. Scripts, characters, even the working title. Keanu stared at the paper. He didn't speak. Victor folded his hands. You have heart, Keanu. But heart doesn't fund the future. Leverage does. Power does. Richard chuckled. You should have asked for a job instead of a donation. Keanu set the folder down. No reaction. No burst of anger. No plea. He looked up, eyes steady. Thank you for the meal. He stood. Miranda tilted her head. Leaving already? I've had what I came for. Colin smirked. Dinner and humiliation? Keanu didn't answer. He walked to the elevator, calm as ever, even as the room behind him erupted in laughter. He pressed the button, waited, breathed. Not for them, not for this. But something in him had shifted. Not broken. Hardened. As the elevator doors opened and swallowed him whole, Keanu realized something. This wasn't failure. It was revelation. The elevator descended in silence, but Keanu's mind wasn't still. His reflection in the polished chrome stared back at him, calm on the surface, but something deeper churned beneath. He wasn't angry. He was awake. The car pulled up outside. The driver opened the door, but Keanu paused before getting in. He looked back once at the tower, a fortress of wealth and cruelty, masked in elegance. He got in and closed the door behind him. Back at his apartment, the city seemed different, harsher, louder. He walked the 3 flights up, turned the key, and entered a space that now felt more sacred than ever. The walls still held the storyboards. The incense still lingered. The music had stopped, but his purpose hadn't. His purpose hadn't. May was waiting, sitting on the edge of the old couch. She stood the second he walked in. Well, she asked. The employee placed the folder gently on the table. May opened it and scanned the contract. Her lips parted in disbelief. Nellie stole it, she whispered. Your pitch, everything. He nodded once, and they laughed while they did it. I told you what they were, she said, pacing now, hands clenching. Why would they do this? What do they get from crushing you like that? Keanu spoke softly. It was never about crushing me, it was about making sure no one else stood. May's eyes were glassy. We needed that funding, that story. Keanu, that was supposed to launch the second campus in Atlanta. I know. She sat down, hands covering her face. For a long while, neither of them spoke. Then Keanu walked over and opened a drawer. Inside were dozens of handwritten letters, applications from students, kids who had sent him short films, essays, drawings. He spread them out across the table. Bailey don't own these, he said. May looked up. Bailey can buy my story, he continued. But they can't buy why I told it. She wiped her eyes. You're not giving up? He shook his head. I'm just beginning. Outside the window, the skyline blinked with 1,000 indifferent lights. But inside, something else had taken root. A quiet resolve. They had humiliated him, but they had also given him clarity. And that was something no contract could steal. Keanu got home close to midnight. The front door closed behind him with a gentle click. The apartment was quiet. No lights except for the soft orange glow of the floor lamp he always left on in the hallway. He didn't turn on any more lights. He walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and sat at the edge of the couch in the dark. For a while, he just stared out the window, the skyline stretching wide and indifferent. Cars moved like blood vessels, lights blinking in the distant arteries of the city. Then he pulled out his phone. One missed call, one voicemail. He tapped play. A small voice filled the room. Hi, Mr. Reeves. It's Dana from Vision Circle. I just wanted to say thank you. My short film got into the San Antonio Youth Fest. They even gave me a little trophy. It's plastic, but it's shiny, and I think my mom cried harder than I did. I didn't think someone like me could ever make something people would want to see. But you did. You told me my story mattered, and now it does. There was a pause, then her voice, softer. Don't stop doing what you do, okay? Please don't stop. The message ended. Keanu set the phone down on the coffee table and leaned back, looking up at the ceiling like it could offer answers. The Langfords' faces burned in his memory. Miranda's smirk, Colin's smug laughter, Victor's cold certainty, that contract, that moment they showed their hand and tried to break him with it. He didn't feel rage. He felt clarity. And that was worse. He stood slowly, walked to his office and pulled out the thick folder labeled Vision Circle, Expansion. It was time to protect what mattered. The next morning, sunlight cut through the blinds in long golden bands. Keanu hadn't slept. He was still in the same clothes, the Vision Circle folder resting open on his lap. Its pages were filled with budgets, letters from students, architectural renderings of future campuses, every line a reminder of why he had started this in the first place. Footsteps approached softly. May entered, holding a coffee mug and a stack of printed emails. She stopped when she saw him sitting there, unmoving. "You didn't come home last night," she said gently. Keanu looked up. His eyes were calm but sunken. "I did. I just didn't leave this room." She set the coffee down beside him. "You've been thinking. Remember Dana?" he asked. "The girl from San Antonio, first gen, raised by her grandmother?" May nodded. "Of course." He warned. May blinked. "What?" "Her short got into a youth festival. She called me last night." He let that hang in the air. Then he said, "And while she was celebrating that, I was sitting across from people who laughed at what gave her that chance." May sat across from him, suddenly quiet. He folded the folder closed. "I'm tired of letting people like that win." It wasn't fury in his voice, not sarcasm, just worn-out truth. A stillness that had settled deep. "Then don't," May said. He looked up, something sparking behind his gaze. "I want everything you can find on the Langfords," he said slowly. "Assets, investments, partnerships, history, hidden ones, old ones, the kind that never make press releases." May leaned back slightly. "You are serious?" "I'm done playing the polite guest. I want to know where their cracks are, and I want to know who helped them build their walls." She gave a slight nod. "I'll start digging." And just like that, the air in the room shifted. 3 hours later, May returned with her laptop tucked under one arm and a hard drive in the other. She dropped both on the table between them. "I haven't slept either," she said. "You lit a fire." Keanu looked up from his notes. He'd been reviewing old project submissions from students, trying to remind himself of what was real, what mattered. May sat beside him and opened the laptop. Langford family structure is layered. Most of their holdings are distributed through 5 shell companies, one of which, Langford Hargrave Holdings, runs through a trust in the Cayman Islands. They use it to funnel money into media properties and political campaigns, all legally gray. Keanu listened silently. Bailey owned 36 companies outright, have controlling stakes in another 20, and when I say controlling, I mean Colin signs the checks, but Victor pulls the strings. She clicked open a document. This is where it gets interesting. Back in 2008, they bought out a struggling media distributor called Brightwood Media. Not a big name, but Brightwood had exclusive international rights to several Asian and African indie markets. Keanu narrowed his eyes. They buried that brand. On paper, yes, May said. But they've been using Brightwood to test exploitative contract models, basically locking filmmakers into permanent low-yield deals, sometimes without even telling them who the actual owner is. Keanu sat back, absorbing it. They do this to independent artists? Almost exclusively, May said. And worse, they promote the deals through what looks like grassroots mentorship programs, fake incubators. Emerging Voices International. Sound familiar? He stiffened. Vision Circle was approached by them last year, he said. They wanted to do a scholarship partnership. I turned them down. Something didn't feel right. May nodded slowly. It wasn't just instinct. It was them. Keanu leaned forward, his elbows on the table. They build these traps for people who don't know better, and when someone does see through it, they use power and shame. He stood and walked to the window. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, let's flip it. May blinked. Flipped what? Everything. He turned back to her. I want to know what Vermilion Pictures is worth. Who they owe, where they're vulnerable, who's been trying to break in but keeps getting pushed out. That's a lot of enemies, May said. Exactly. He walked to the whiteboard on the wall and grabbed a marker. In bold black strokes, he wrote 2 words, legacy leverage. They tried to humiliate me because they thought I had no leverage. But they forgot something. May looked at the words, then back at him. Baby forgot your name? She said softly. He smiled faintly. Bibly forgot my reach. Quiet doesn't mean powerless. He started listing names. Directors he had helped early in their careers. Journalists who owed him stories. Former executives who had left Vermilion in bitterness or disgrace. Old friends with long memories. Every person they stepped on to climb, Keanu said. I want to find them. May typed quickly. Okay, but if we do this, it's not a letter-writing campaign. This is going to draw attention. I'm counting on it. She looked up at him, her tone changing. You're not just protecting the kids anymore, are you? He shook his head slowly. This time, I'm protecting the future from the people who think they own it. He pointed to the folder. I won't let Dana become content in someone else's empire. He paced for a moment, then stopped. Pull everything we have on that Brightwood buyout. Cross-relation it with every filmmaker who lost rights between 2009 and 2013. May nodded. I'll call in a few favors. A tech guy I know used to work for Langford's digital team. He got fired after he flagged shady metadata. Keanu raised an eyebrow. Bring him in. Tonight. She smiled. You really are going after them? No, I'm just telling the story they buried. He looked back at the whiteboard. Legacy leverage. For the first time in hours, he exhaled with purpose. And somewhere in the city, the Langfords continued their day, still convinced the evening had ended with laughter. They hadn't realized what they'd created. They hadn't created shame. They'd planted a seed, and it was already growing. By Sunday afternoon, the apartment looked like a war room. Every surface was covered. Whiteboards, laptops, legal pads, timelines scribbled across walls. May had moved in 2 extra monitors and turned the dining table into a hub of constant research. Empty coffee cups lined the window ledge, and a playlist of ambient jazz hummed in the background. interrupted only by bursts of conversation or new discoveries. May worked at the center, flanked by two women from her old law firm, Vi Tran and Helena Brooks. Both were quiet, meticulous, and absolutely ruthless with contracts. They had been pulled from semi-retirement, intrigued not by money, but by the story behind it. In a corner, a young researcher named Evan tapped furiously at his keyboard, cross-referencing SEC filings, private mergers, and media trends. He had a photographic memory and a slight stutter, but when he spoke, people listened. At exactly 2 p.m., the front door opened and a man stepped inside. Broad-shouldered, gray-stubbled, and sharply dressed, in a jacket that didn't belong in this decade, he carried no briefcase, no laptop. Just presence. Alejandro. Keanu looked up and nodded. Thanks for coming. Alejandro smiled faintly. When May says come quietly, I bring 2 burner phones and no last name. May stood and introduced him to the team. Alejandro is the reason half of South America's media barons sleep with one eye open. Alejandro waved off the compliment. I prefer chess to war, but I'm fluent in both. He moved straight to the table and scanned the map of documents, diagrams, and color-coded strings. Langfords, he muttered. Of course it's them. Within 15 minutes, he found it. A hidden trail that ran from a European investment bank through 2 shell companies and ended in a credit facility registered to Vermilion Pictures. He tapped the document. This right here, he said, is their soft underbelly. Everyone gathered around as Alejandro zoomed in on the document. It was a loan agreement, technically public but buried beneath layers of legal fog and outdated filings. The terms were aggressive, bordering on desperate. Vermilion Pictures had taken out a $120 million 0-cents bridge loan 3 years ago to cover post-production and distribution costs for a tentpole film called Red Ember, but the movie flopped, critically, commercially, and catastrophically. Alejandro pointed to the interest clause. They've been paying penalty rates since the 3rd quarter, and they're refinancing through a third-party creditor that specializes in hostile takeovers. V leaned closer, eyebrows raised. So, if they default? They may lose control, Alejandro said. Not just of the film catalog, of the board seats, of the whole damn empire. Helena scrolled through related documents. And look here, 3 of their major talent deals expired last month. They didn't renew, and the PR fallout from Red Ember cost them their distribution deal with Flaremax Studios. May leaned back in her chair. So they're bleeding from every side. Alejandro nodded. They're asset-rich but cash-poor. One lawsuit, one leak, one badly timed market move, and they crumble. Keanu stood at the edge of the room, arms crossed, listening quietly. And the public doesn't know this? He asked. Evan shook his head. Not yet. They've kept the illusion airtight. They're even staging a press event next week to announce a new creative vision. It's pure smoke. Keanu looked toward the whiteboard. Under legacy leverage, May had written a new line. Perception is power, until it's not. Helena glanced up. You want to expose this? No, Keanu said. Not yet. Alejandro raised an eyebrow. Then what? Keanu stepped forward, his voice calm but sharp. I want to understand every inch of it. Before we strike, I want to know what holds it together. And more importantly, what doesn't. May closed her laptop. Then there's one more thing we haven't looked at. She walked to the far end of the room where a weathered filing box sat unopened. She had pulled it from storage early that morning, not quite knowing why. This belonged to my mother, she said softly. She kept it when she handled minor contracts for indie distributors in the early 2000s, back before she switched to estate law. She popped the lid. Inside were a few old binders, envelopes yellowed with time, and several carbon copies of studio contracts from smaller production houses. May handed one to Alejandro. He scanned it, then stopped. Wait. His eyes widened. He held up the final page of one document. an acquisition form dated 2003. The buyer was Langford Hargrave Holdings. The seller was listed as Persephone Grant. May froze. "No," she whispered. "No way." Keanu blinked. "What is it?" May flipped through another page, heart racing. "There's a conditional transfer clause," she said. "It says that after 25 years, ownership rights can revert." She turned the page toward Keanu. "And the original investor listed here, Persephone Grant. That's your mother." The room fell silent. Keanu stepped closer, taking the faded document in his hands. His fingers hovered just above the signature, as if afraid to smudge it. There it was, written in a flowing, familiar script he hadn't seen in years. Persephone Grant. "My mother's name before she married," he murmured. "No one outside my family even knows it." May swallowed hard. She was the investor, and not just a donor. She had legal standing. This clause right here, it says the rights to the studio's first 3 intellectual properties, plus a % of equity in the Brightwood acquisition, could revert to her estate after 25 years, unless bought out. Alejandro was already flipping through the fine print. They never triggered the buyout. Helena leaned in, stunned. "You're telling me they let this clause go dormant?" "Because they never expected anyone to come looking," Alejandro replied. Bai pointed to a paragraph. "There's more. If Persephone Grant's estate can prove succession and interest, the ownership clause becomes legally active next year." Keanu stared down at the page, his heart pounding, but not from excitement, from awe. "She never told me," he said. "Not once." May touched his arm. "Maybe she thought it wouldn't matter. Or maybe she was waiting for you to find it when it did." Alejandro closed the binder slowly, his tone shifting from curiosity to calculation. "This changes everything. You're not just a rival now. You might be a stakeholder." "But what does that mean in practice?" Keanu asked. "Do I go public, sue them?" Alejandro shook his head. "Not yet. If this goes to court, it becomes a circus. You need leverage, not headlines. This clause is a time bomb, and until it matures, it's also your shield." May stepped forward. "So we keep digging, quietly. We check every license, every asset tied to Brightwood and the Langford Hargrave chain. If your mother's clause extends even an inch further than they thought, we could find gaps big enough to drive through." "And what do we do when we find them?" Keanu asked. Alejandro answered without pause. "We buy." Keanu's brows lifted. "Buy what?" "The future," Alejandro said. "We find the contracts they can't cover, the debts they've hidden, the partners they've slighted. We find the people desperate to get out and give them away. Piece by piece, we strip them of the foundation they've built. And when the moment comes, we walk in, not as guests, but as owners." Helena smiled. "Quiet revenge." "No," Keanu said, his voice low and clear. "Not revenge. Balance." He looked back down at his mother's name, Persephone Grant, the woman who raised him with kindness and steel, who taught him that art had worth even when the world ignored it, who must have known, even then, what these people would try to bury. "This wasn't an accident," he said softly. "She planted this, for me." May looked up from her notes. "We'll honor it." Keanu nodded once, the decision settling in him like gravity. "Then let's begin." Keanu sat in the quiet of his apartment, the pages of the old contract spread out before him like a ghost finally come home. The ink had faded with time, but the signatures remained intact, and the clause, still legally viable, glared up at him like a secret finally ready to speak. May stood nearby, watching him read it again for the 5th time. "I had no idea," Keanu whispered. May nodded slowly. "You weren't supposed to. That clause was buried deep. Most people wouldn't even notice it unless they were actively hunting for legacy clauses in dormant investment trusts. And even then, her voice trailed off as she saw something flicker in his eyes. Not confusion, not anger, but something quieter, something deeper. He was remembering. 20 years ago, Keanu had just wrapped filming on a small indie project when his mother, Persephone, had flown to New York for a few weeks. She'd told him she was helping with a legal matter for a friend. She didn't elaborate, and he didn't ask. They went to a gallery together, had long dinners by the Hudson, talked about stories more than business. Now those empty spaces were beginning to fill. May sat across from him, her voice softer. "Your mother didn't just help them, she saved them." Keanu looked up. The year was 2003. Vermilion was weeks away from collapse. They had poured most of their capital into an ambitious sci-fi trilogy that never got off the ground. Meanwhile, Richard Langford's only son, Thomas, was diagnosed with a rare autoimmune disorder. Treatment was experimental and expensive. May turned the document around. This clause here was Persephone's offer. She fronted the capital through Arrow and Vine Holdings. Silent stake, full confidentiality. Her only condition? If Vermilion ever entered bankruptcy, her estate would retain acquisition rights on the assets. Keanu leaned back, stunned. Why would she do that? May's reply was immediate. Because she believed in art. May reached into the file box again and pulled out a manila envelope marked simply, medical correspondence. She placed it gently on the table. Thomas Langford's condition was called eosinophilic granulomatosis, ultra rare. Back then, the treatment required travel between Boston and Switzerland. The Langfords had insurance issues. One of their shell companies flagged an audit. It nearly ruined them. Keanu opened the envelope. Inside were photocopies of letters his mother had written, some typed, some in her own graceful handwriting. One stood out. To whom it may concern, I believe Vermilion's creative library has cultural value that must be preserved beyond profit. My offer is not charitable, it is protective. If art is to survive, it must be held by hands that do not shake when the money moves. Respectfully, Persephone. Keanu stared at the signature, tracing the curves of each letter with his eyes. That was her voice, measured, humble, quietly unbreakable. Him fronted $7 million, May said. Adjusted for inflation, that would be just over $11 million today. The Langfords didn't just survive, they launched a recovery campaign, used your mother's funding to retain talent, sell international rights to their back catalog, and generate enough goodwill to partner with Brightwood 3 years later. Alejandro, who had just returned from a call, stepped in. And here's the kicker. That funding? It was funneled in through Arrow and Vine discreetly, then recorded as anonymous private equity, meaning the Langfords chose to erase her from the narrative. Keanu was silent. Had Bailey buried her name? May said. Alejandro added. But they couldn't bury the clause. Keanu stood and walked to the window. The skyline glowed orange, the sun beginning its descent behind the buildings. He let the silence breathe for a while before finally speaking. She didn't live long after that, he said. Stage 4 ovarian cancer. She told me late. Said she didn't want it to become my burden. He turned back around. I thought she spent her final year resting, traveling, painting again, but she was fighting for something the whole time. Alejandro placed a thin legal summary on the table. You now legally control a dormant claim on Vermilion. If the company enters bankruptcy or attempts a structural overhaul, your claim can become active, and considering their current debt, that's not just possible, it's likely. Keanu walked over and picked up the paper. Then they humiliated the son of the woman who saved them. His voice didn't rise, it didn't break. But something in the room did. Because now, this wasn't just about protecting a legacy or a non-profit. It was about honoring a woman who gave everything she had to save the future of something beautiful, and was erased for it. May said quietly. She didn't just give them a loan. She gave them a second chance. And they repaid it with silence. Keanu placed the document back down. Then let's make some noise. Alejandro smiled. Loud or quiet? Keanu didn't hesitate. Truth doesn't need to shout, it just needs to stand up. The team around him nodded. One by one, they began marking the whiteboard with new connections. Persephone Grant, Arrow and Vine Holdings. Thomas Langford's treatment records, the false equity reports. As the board filled with arrows, timelines, and red underlines, one word sat alone at the top. Legacy. And beneath it, slowly added in black marker, by May's hand. Truth belongs to the one who protects it. By midnight, the board was full. Keanu stood before it, arms crossed, absorbing the map of connections, betrayals, and forgotten names. What had once been a dinner invitation was now exposed as a trap built on decades of denial. And yet, from the heart of that deception, something unexpected had emerged. Proof that his mother had never surrendered, not even in her final year. May was sitting on the couch with her laptop balanced on one knee, eyes locked on a blinking cursor. "I'm drafting the framework for your claim," she said. "We'll need to prove breach of contract, concealment of identity, and establish you as Persephone's rightful successor. That means notarized records, statements from anyone who worked with Arrow and Vine, and ideally, someone from the Langford side who remembers the truth." Alejandro looked up from his phone. "I may have a lead. There's a former CFO, Gregory Halden, quiet man, took early retirement after Brightwood was absorbed. No one's heard from him in years, but if he signs an affidavit..." Keanu nodded. "Find him." Helen and Vi had begun categorizing evidence. Public records, shell company registries, digital timestamps. Their folders now stretched across the table like a courtroom waiting to happen. But it was Evan, the quiet researcher in the corner, who delivered the next surprise. "I found something," he said. Everyone turned. He stood, holding up an old video file, grainy but audible. He played it. It was a press conference from 2004. Richard Langford stood behind a podium, flanked by then-president of Brightwood and several board members. "In the darkest hour," Richard was saying, "we were saved by a private equity angel. She asked for no credit, no applause, just the survival of this dream we call Vermilion." Evan paused the video. That was the only time Richard ever publicly acknowledged outside help. He didn't name her, but the timing matches, and we now have the contracts to prove who that angel was. May smiled. "We're not just telling a story," she said. "We're restoring a name." Keanu looked at the paused frame on the screen. Richard Langford, younger then. Speaking of gratitude, he clearly didn't carry forward. "New," Keanu said quietly. He remembered her. "And still, he sat there last week and watched his family laugh at me like I didn't belong." Alejandro leaned forward, voice low. "What are you going to do with all this?" Keanu stared at the screen for a long time. Ari would soon appear. "I'm going to do what she did," he said. "I'm going to fight quietly, I'm going to move carefully, and when they least expect it..." He paused. "I'm going to remind them that some legacies aren't for sale." May shut her laptop. "Then we need time to gather, to verify, to position you where it counts." Keanu turned toward the window again. The skyline still gleamed, but it looked different now. Less distant, more alive. The weight he'd been carrying for weeks had started to shift. Not because of vengeance, but because of clarity. They hadn't just underestimated him. They'd forgotten his roots. They'd forgotten the woman who funded their survival, then disappeared without asking for anything in return. Now her voice would speak through him, and this time it wouldn't be erased. May approached quietly and handed him the original contract. He took it in both hands, breathing in the faint scent of paper and ink. A time capsule from a past he hadn't known existed. Until now. He looked to her. "We keep going," he said. She nodded. home document at a time. And with that, the team moved back into motion, the hum of quiet voices and keystrokes filling the room again. The past was no longer buried. It had become a weapon. 3 months passed like shifting clouds. Slow on the surface, storming underneath. Keanu said nothing to the press. He didn't change his daily rhythm. He still walked to his foundation's office each morning, still mentored students in the afternoons, still read scripts at night under a dim lamp while jazz played in the background. But behind the curtain, everything was in motion. Alejandro had built the first shell company, registered in Montana under the name Branlow Trust Holdings. It was invisible by design. Through it, Keanu quietly began acquiring Vermilion's outstanding debt, one distressed bond at a time. The first was a $1,200,000 0-cents tranche tied to their failed streaming initiative, then another linked to their European distribution branch. Within weeks, he had purchased nearly 40% of Vermilion's unsecured liabilities at a discount. By the end of the second month, he controlled a majority of their callable debt. But he never signed a single document with his own name. Every contract, every wire transfer, every intermediary legal notice went through proxies, trusted agents, and old contacts from the legal world who owed Alejandro favors. The Langfords remained unaware. In fact, Colin was still parading through investor meetings in Milan, assuring partners that Vermilion's renaissance phase was just around the corner. Richard was busy managing the estate's renovation. Miranda had signed on to produce a reality show in Dubai. They had no idea the walls were already crumbling. May coordinated the timing of every purchase. Helena filed quiet complaints with the SEC to delay Langford capital raises without disclosing the source. Evan and V traced ownership layers to ensure no trail ever pointed back to Keanu. It was silent warfare, and it was working. By month 3, Branlow Trust Holdings had the leverage to trigger the clause Persephone Grant had buried 2 decades earlier. The legal notification was sent on a Friday morning. By the time Richard Langford read it, it was too late. The document arrived by certified courier, delivered to the marble reception desk of Langford Media Group at exactly 8:47 a.m. Richard Langford was still in his study upstairs, reading financial projections while sipping his morning espresso. The receptionist called up to notify him, unaware that the envelope she held was about to end an era. It was Helena who had drafted the final execution notice, a precisely worded document invoking Clause 17C of the original 2003 agreement, including notarized proof of investment lineage, debt acquisition evidence, and a formal trigger of ownership reversion in the event of declared insolvency. By 10:12 a.m., the Langfords' legal team was in full panic. Richard stood at the head of the boardroom table, his hands clenched, his voice sharp with disbelief. This clause isn't enforceable, but even as he said it, he knew it was. The lawyers had gone pale. Miranda sat with her arms crossed, flipping through the packet in silence. Colin wasn't even in the city. He was in Ibiza, clueless. The numbers didn't lie. Vermilion's debt obligations had matured without coverage, and according to the fine print in Persephone's contract, once that happened, her estate, now legally represented by Branlow Trust Holdings, could assume controlling interest in the company's creative and intellectual assets. It was a full transfer, irrevocable. "What's Branlow Trust?" Richard asked. No one knew. That Monday, a hearing was scheduled in Superior Court to finalize the proceedings. The Langfords filed a countermotion, desperate to stall, but Alejandro had anticipated it. Vi submitted sealed documentation confirming the legitimacy of the acquisition chain, along with statements from 3 former Vermilion board members who had quietly agreed to testify. The case was closed in 90 minutes. At exactly 2:17 p.m., the presiding judge announced the verdict. Due to breach of original equity terms, default on declared obligations, and verified debt acquisition by Persephone Grant's lawful successor, the board of Vermilion Pictures was hereby dissolved. All voting shares and creative assets were transferred to Branlow Trust Holdings. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Reporters raced for the door. Then came the final twist. As the new representative of Branlow Trust was called forward, the courtroom doors opened. Keanu Reeves stepped inside. He was dressed in a simple black suit, no tie, no entourage, just calm footsteps echoing on marble as every Langford head turned in stunned recognition. Richard's jaw visibly dropped. "You?" Keanu approached the bench, offering a respectful nod to the judge before facing the Langfords directly. "You?" Richard repeated, his voice cracking. Keanu met his eyes. "Just business," he said quietly. "That's what you taught me." For a full 5 seconds, no one spoke. The weight of it hung in the air like thunder that never arrived. Then Richard collapsed back into his seat. Miranda looked away, shame creeping across her otherwise impenetrable face. Colin's name lit up on Richard's phone, calling from overseas. He didn't answer. Keanu turned and walked back through the same door he had entered, saying nothing more. There were no press statements, no gloating, just the truth. Finally standing upright, after years of silence. And in that moment, the empire that had once laughed at him belonged to him, not as a trophy, but as justice fulfilled. The next morning, headlines exploded across every media outlet. Vermilion Pictures acquired in shock deal, anonymous shell linked to Keanu Reeves. The quiet takeover, how one man toppled a billionaire empire without a word. Reeves pulls power move, silences the Langfords in stunning courtroom turnaround. But Keanu remained silent. He didn't give interviews, he didn't pose for photos. When a swarm of journalists camped outside the Vision Circle office hoping for a quote, he simply nodded politely and walked past them. When paparazzi waited outside his apartment, he entered through the service door. What the world didn't know was that he wasn't celebrating, he was planning. Inside the foundation, May stood at the head of a table filled with vision boards. Alejandro was updating a timeline that stretched into the next 5 years. Helena and Vi were finalizing the legal merger of Vermilion's assets into a new public trust. Evan was digitizing every clause, contract, and royalty agreement into a clean, transparent archive. Keanu walked in, sat down, and studied the screen in front of him. It displayed every department Vermilion had once controlled: distribution, production, development, marketing. Most had been gutted in recent years to cover debt. Some existed only in name. He stared at the empty boxes. "We're not rebuilding what they had," he said. "We're building what they never dared to." Alejandro nodded. "No red carpets, no nepotism, just stories." "And truth," Keanu added. "Stories that come from truth." May leaned forward. "We can create a model where young filmmakers don't just get a shot, they keep their rights, their voice, their future." Keanu nodded slowly. "Then we start with that." But there was one final piece that had yet to be addressed. The Langfords. Technically, they were out. The board was dissolved, their equity voided. But Richard, Miranda, and Colin still held sway in the industry, still had influence, still whispered into the ears of powerful friends. So Keanu requested a meeting. Privately, no lawyers, no cameras. The Langfords agreed, if only out of pride. They met in the very same penthouse where the original dinner had taken place, only now it belonged to a real estate company preparing to auction it. The table was smaller this time, no silverware, no wine, just the three of them on one side and Keanu on the other. Richard was gaunt. Miranda looked like she hadn't slept. Colin was trying to posture, but his voice shook when he spoke. "What do you want, Keanu?" he asked. Keanu was quiet for a long time. Then, "I want you to remember something." They said nothing. "My mother saved your empire, and you erased her." Miranda looked away. "Then you humiliated her son, publicly. For sport?" Colin opened his mouth, but Keanu held up a hand. "I'm not asking for an apology. You already gave me what I needed." Richard spoke for the first time, his voice low. "And what was that?" "Permission." Richard frowned. "To destroy us, to replace you." He stood. "You taught me everything I needed to know about power. I just chose to use it differently." And with that, he turned to leave. At the door, he paused and looked back. "One more thing." They looked up. This wasn't revenge, it was correction. Then he walked out, leaving the weight of their own silence behind. Outside, the city kept moving, unaware of the quiet shift that had taken place behind penthouse doors. But something had changed forever. Keanu. The story had been reclaimed. The page had turned. And for the first time in decades, truth, not legacy, held the pen. The headlines came fast and loud. Keanu Reeves acquires Vermilion Pictures for $8 million, 0 cents, in silent takeover. Reeves topples Langford dynasty. Industry shock. The actor who became the empire's owner. The reactions were mixed. On one side, celebration. Finally, someone decent owns a studio. He'll played the long game and won. Karma, served cold and elegant. On the other side, skepticism. Actors should act, not run companies. No legacy for personal gain. Keanu just bought revenge. What's he going to do with it? Social media boiled over with debate. Influencers posted think pieces. Film critics speculated about his next move. A few opportunists, once loyal to the Langfords, tried to rewrite history and praise him. Keanu didn't reply to any of it. He sat in his new office, Vermilion's old executive suite, now stripped of its gold accents and over-polished furniture. He had kept the original desk, though, not for its value, for what it represented. The desk was solid walnut, heavy, immovable, and scarred. Years of ambition had passed over its surface. It still held a faint smell of ink and cigar smoke. Beneath the top drawer was a small brass keyhole. Keanu reached into the envelope May had handed him earlier, a collection of master keys they'd recovered from the company vault. He selected one and turned it slowly. The drawer creaked open. Inside were rows of old manila folders. Notes, receipts, handwritten memos from producers, letters from hopeful writers who had never been called back, and near the back, a small bundle tied in string. Keanu untied it gently. They were thank you letters. Stacks of them, all handwritten. Some from employees who had left, others from interns. One was from a lighting technician's daughter, thanking the studio that gave her father hope again. Keanu's hand stilled when he reached the last envelope. The handwriting was shaky, childlike. He unfolded it carefully. The paper was wrinkled, the ink slightly smudged in places, as if written by a hand too small to keep the pen steady. Crayon marks lined the edges, red stars, a crooked sun, and what looked like two stick figures holding hands. At the top, in large uneven letters, it read, "Dear Miss Grant." Keanu's breath caught. He read slowly, "My name is Daniel Langford. I'm 7 years old. My daddy said I was very sick and the hospital costs a lot. He said you paid for me to get better. I don't really know what that means, but he cried when he said it. He doesn't cry a lot, so I think it was big. I wanted to write this letter to say thank you. The nurses say I'm getting stronger. I don't feel scared anymore. My mom said I should draw a picture too, so I drew me and you. I never met you, but I hope you look like the angel I saw in my dream. Thank you for saving my life. My family says you gave us everything. Love, Daniel." Keanu sat frozen. He looked down at the signature, tiny, jagged block letters spelling Daniel Langford. Then up again at the name on the envelope, Miss Persephone Grant. His mother, and Daniel, Richard's son. The very boy Persephone had helped save. The very family who, decades later, would erase her from their story and laugh at her son as if none of it had ever mattered. Keanu closed his eyes. He remembered his mother in those final months. How calm she had seemed. How she'd spent her time reading, painting, sipping tea while the world passed around her. She had said very little about her past, even less about her illness. But now, piece by piece, her silence made sense. She wasn't retreating. She was preparing, building something that couldn't be corrupted, something that would live beyond her, not just for him, but for the children like Daniel, for the fathers who couldn't afford hope, for the mothers too tired to keep asking. He looked again at the letter, at the joy in the lines, the innocence in the sketch. And something inside him cracked, not from anger, from grief. His eyes welled up as he placed the letter carefully on the desk, smoothing its edges with both hands. He didn't wipe the tears. He let them fall, quietly, fully, like rain that had been building for years. Outside the office window, the city continued its chaotic rhythm. Taxis blared, cameras clicked. Somewhere another headline about him was being written, but none of that reached him here. Here, it was just him, and the words of a little boy who had lived. Because she had given, because she had cared. Keanu leaned back in the chair, arms folded over his chest. He took a deep breath, letting it settle into his ribs. Then he whispered to the room, his voice barely audible. "Thank you, Mom." He sat for a long time after that, not planning, not strategizing, just remembering who she was, and why he could never let her be forgotten again. Eventually, the tears stopped, but the weight didn't leave. Keanu stood slowly and walked over to the large wall safe that had once held Vermilion's most guarded contracts. Alejandro had joked that it was the most secure place in the building, lined with titanium, triple-digit passcodes, fingerprint lock. The Langfords used it to hide their most valuable secrets. Now Keanu would use it to protect something else. He placed the letter from Daniel inside, along with the original Persephone contract, the photo of her handwritten signature, and one more item, an old Polaroid of her holding him on her lap in their tiny Toronto apartment, laughing at something off-camera. He locked the safe, turned the dial, and stepped back. That was the moment he understood. This wasn't just a win. It wasn't just justice. It was responsibility. He turned off the light and left the office. Outside, May was waiting in the hallway, holding her phone. "More noise," she said, nodding toward the screen. "Everyone's weighing in. Hollywood, business media, even a few politicians. Some are angry, some are confused. Everyone's trying to make it about them." Keanu walked past her and into the elevator. "They will," he said softly. "Until we show them it's not." The doors closed, sealing them inside. May looked at him carefully. "Are you okay?" He didn't answer right away. Just looked down at the floor numbers lighting up one by one. "I thought it would feel like something," he said, taking it back. "All of it. I thought there'd be peace." May nodded. "And?" "It's quiet," he said. "But it's not peace, not yet." When they reached the bottom, he stepped out and into the night air. The city buzzed around him. Screens flashing headlines, people walking fast and blind. But he walked slowly, deliberately, as if every step carried something forward that couldn't be seen. They arrived at the Vision Circle building, the smaller space he'd rented years ago. Inside, students were still editing projects, huddled around monitors with headphones on, scribbling notes on storyboards taped to the walls. One girl looked up and smiled. "You came back," she said. He nodded. "I never left." He sat at an empty desk and opened a student script. The story was raw, messy, but alive. It pulsed with something real. Pain, beauty, hope. It reminded him why any of this had ever mattered. Across the room, May watched him. She didn't interrupt. She just smiled, because she knew the truth too. This wasn't a victory. It was a beginning. And sometimes, beginnings came dressed in ashes. Later that night, as he prepared to leave, Keanu paused in the doorway and looked back at the students working under soft fluorescent lights. He remembered Daniel's words again. You gave us everything. Not wealth, not power. A chance. A name. A future. He walked into the dark, the city stretching out before him, unglamorous and real. And for the first time in weeks, he didn't feel alone. He felt guided by her, by what she'd left behind, and by what he was now ready to build. It started with a name, Dr. Marianne Lasker. Keanu had found her name scribbled on one of the medical expense records Persephone had kept, tucked into a notebook filled with quietly managed accounts from 20 years ago. The handwriting was unmistakable, his mother's rounded script, neat even in the margins. May made a few discreet calls, and by the end of the week, Keanu had an address. The clinic was modest, tucked between a bookstore and a florist in Montclair, New Jersey. He arrived unannounced, wearing no sunglasses or hat, just himself. A nurse recognized him but said nothing. She led him to the back office and knocked softly. Dr. Lasker, you have a visitor. Inside, a woman in her 70s stood up from her desk. Her eyes were sharp behind oval glasses, her white coat neatly pressed. She took one look at Keanu and paused. He stepped forward gently. I think you treated a patient named Daniel Langford about 20 years ago. Her expression didn't change. I did, she said slowly. We almost lost him. Keanu nodded, his voice quiet. My mother helped pay for his care. Persephone Grant. Dr. Lasker blinked, then sat down slowly. She never told anyone her name. Keanu sat across from her. She told me even less. The doctor opened a drawer and pulled out an old binder, thick with paper and faded tabs. From the middle, she extracted a sheet labeled Anonymous Benefactor Account. There were hundreds of pages of billing issues, she said. The Langfords had powerful insurance brokers, but legal troubles made payment complicated. The treatments were costly. Daniel was on an experimental medication flown in from Zurich. His parents couldn't cover it. She looked up. One morning, I received a call, a soft voice, very direct. She said she wanted to pay for everything. Quietly, she wired the full amount by end of day. Keanu's hands curled together. She never told me that, he whispered. Dr. Lasker looked at him gently. She didn't want credit, just results. He swallowed hard, heart swelling with a strange combination of awe and ache. She saved his life. She did, Dr. Lasker said. And she never once visited, never asked for acknowledgement, just that the boy be taken care of. Keanu left the clinic without speaking much more. Dr. Lasker had offered him tea, a moment to sit, but he had politely declined. His heart was already too full. The wind outside felt sharper than before, but maybe that was just the air clearing inside him. He sat in the back of the car as it pulled away, watching the buildings blur by, his mother's voice faint in his mind. She had always said the greatest good is the one that doesn't ask for praise, and now he knew just how deeply she had lived by that. Back at his office, May was waiting with her laptop open and her expression unreadable. She looked up. You found her? Keanu nodded. She confirmed it. My mother paid for everything. Quietly. Completely. May sat back in her chair, her jaw tight. And they never even said her name. Keanu didn't respond. He didn't need to. Instead, May turned the screen toward him. You need to see this. One by one, she clicked through tabs. News blurbs, insider reports, private memos. The Langford empire hadn't just fallen, it had shattered. Richard Langford had been hospitalized that morning, suffering what doctors called an exhaustive collapse from prolonged stress, adrenal fatigue, and suspected heart arrhythmia. No visitors were allowed. Miranda Langford had been seen exiting a private auction house in London. The diamonds she was once known for, the ones she said were family history, had just been listed for emergency sale. The gossip blogs speculated on debt. One whispered she had mortgaged her home and was down to 3 credit cards, and Colin, Colin was spiraling. Caught on video in a bar in Mykonos, clearly intoxicated, screaming at an investor who no longer returned his calls, he had lost 2 deals in the last month. Rumors of legal trouble were already circling. "They're finished," May said softly. "Not just professionally, personally." Keanu stared at the screen. He didn't feel joy, or relief, or triumph, just quiet. "They built something powerful," May said, "on cruelty, on control. And now it's gone." She closed the laptop. "You got justice." Keanu stood there a long time, looking down at the polished concrete floor, hands in his pockets, his breath shallow. "No," he whispered. May looked at him, confused. "I got a mirror." He turned his gaze toward her and she saw the pain in it. "And I don't like what I see." She was silent. "This was never about owning a studio," he said. "It wasn't about flipping the power." He began pacing slowly. "It started with honoring her, my mother, what she did, what she never got credit for. But somewhere in all the legal battles and negotiations and tactics, I stopped asking what she would have done next." May stepped closer. "Keanu, you didn't become them, you exposed them." "I did more than expose them," he said quietly. "I broke them, every piece. I took back the power and crushed what was left, and now," he paused, searching for words. "Now I'm standing in a space that's mine, but it doesn't feel like it belongs to anyone." May folded her arms, her voice calm. "Do you regret it?" Keanu looked at her. "No." She raised an eyebrow. "But I regret what it cost." He walked to the large window that overlooked the city. The sun had dipped lower, spilling gold across the skyline. "They taught me that power was about silence and threat, that kindness was weakness, that legacy belonged to those who took it." His voice softened. "But I remember what she taught me instead, that the most powerful thing you can do is let someone else shine." He looked over his shoulder at May. "I don't want to be a king. I want to be a lighthouse." She smiled at that. "Then be one," she said. He turned back to the window, and for the first time since it all began, he allowed himself to dream forward. Not about revenge, not about reclaiming, but about rebuilding something no one could steal. Something with no name on the door, just an open one. Always open, and light spilling out. The knock on the door was hesitant, soft enough to be overlooked, yet steady enough to feel intentional. Keanu looked up from the conference table inside the Vision Circle office, where he'd been reviewing lighting plans from a student's upcoming short. The knock came again. "Come in," he called gently. The door creaked open. A girl stepped in, no more than 21. Her posture was nervous, but her eyes were clear. She wore a loose canvas jacket, a gray turtleneck, and held a manila folder tightly in both arms as if it were protecting her from something more than weather. "Mr. Reeves?" she asked. He stood slowly, offering a calm nod. "Yes." She stepped forward. "My name is Isla." "Isla Langford." He didn't react visibly, but the name rang through the room like a struck bell. Langford. She noticed. "I know how that sounds. I know what it means. But I'm not here for them." Keanu said nothing. His expression remained open, patient. She took another few steps and stopped at the table, still gripping the folder. "I'm Richard Langford's granddaughter. Miranda is my aunt. Colin, well, you know." She exhaled, steadying herself. "But I'm not like them. I wasn't in that room. I didn't laugh. I didn't plot." He gestured to a nearby chair. Isla hesitated, then sat. "I've been watching your foundation since I was 17, she said. "I used to stream Vision Circle shorts in the middle of the night with earbuds on, terrified someone in my house would find out. I read articles about you, followed project blogs. I saw how the students talked about you, not just as a mentor, but as someone who believed in them before anyone else did." Keanu remained quiet, listening. Isla reached into her folder and slid it forward. My application. Film scripts, storyboards, production design ideas, a few rough cuts on a USB. I know I'm not trained. I didn't go to NYU. I didn't intern at a boutique firm, but I've studied every shot you've taught, every edit your students made, and I want to learn the right way, the honest way. Keanu looked down at the folder. The edges were worn, like it had been held for weeks, maybe longer. I want to intern, Isla said. But more than that, she paused and her voice dropped. I want you to give them dignity again. That made Keanu look up. Who? My family, she said. My grandfather, my aunt, even Colin. They destroyed their own dignity, Keanu said, softly. I know, she whispered, and I'm not defending them. But I've lived inside that world. I've heard them behind closed doors. They're broken. Not just publicly. Inside. She looked him in the eye. I'm not asking you to fix them. I'm asking you to be the only person who could show them what grace looks like. Keanu leaned back in his chair, absorbing her words. His fingers rested against the edge of the folder, but he didn't open it yet. Why now? He asked. Isla looked down at her hands. Because this is the first time I could walk in here without lying. He waited. I was raised to believe power mattered more than people, she said. That legacy excused cruelty, but when it all came crashing down, when your name showed up in that courtroom and no one could breathe, I saw something I'd never seen before. She looked at him again, her voice steady. You didn't smile? You didn't even look satisfied. You didn't gloat. She took a breath. Do you know what that did to me? Seeing someone win with integrity, it made me realize I'd spent most of my life trying not to become like them, but never knowing who to become instead. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded photograph. It was a grainy still from an old Vision Circle short. Two kids on a rusted fire escape, filming each other with a borrowed camera. That's me, she said. I submitted this to your youth showcase 4 years ago. I never got in. I wasn't ready. But I kept learning, kept watching, because I wanted to be part of something that wasn't built on fear. Keanu finally opened her folder. The work was raw, scribbled notes, ink smudges, rough sketches of camera angles and lighting cues, but there was fire in it. The kind that couldn't be taught, only carried. I'm not asking for a seat at the table because of my name, she said. I'm asking to leave the name behind, to build something real. Keanu looked up from her pages. You could have changed it, he said. I almost did, she admitted. But hiding from my last name felt like letting them define me anyway. I'd rather bring it here, sit it down and do something different with it. His voice was low, but clear. You're asking me to help restore the dignity of the same people who mocked me? Isla didn't flinch. I'm asking you to show them what dignity actually is. Keanu was quiet for a long time. Then he stood. He walked to the whiteboard along the side of the room, where a single phrase still remained, written in bold black marker, legacy leverage. Under it, May had recently added, truth belongs to the one who protects it. He picked up the marker and slowly wrote a new word beneath it, grace. Then he turned back to her. If you come here, he said, you come as a student, not a Langford, no special treatment, no press, no shortcuts. I wouldn't want any, she said. And you'll have to work twice as hard, because the name follows you whether you carry it proudly or not. I already know that, she said softly. Keanu nodded once. Then leave the name at the door, not in shame, in choice. She stood, holding out her hand. I'm ready. He took it. Her grip was firm. Outside, the city raged on, with headlines and noise, but inside that small sacred space, something had shifted. Not just forgiveness, not just mentorship, but the beginning of something neither of them could name yet. Something quiet, dignified, and real. And somewhere in the silence, the legacy that tried to bury them both began its quiet transformation. Not into power, but into purpose. The hospital room was still, save for the occasional click of machines tracking Richard Langford's vitals. Outside, muted sunlight filtered through the window blinds, casting stripes of gold and gray across the floor. A bouquet of wilted lilies sat in a corner vase, forgotten by whoever had brought them. Keanu stood just inside the door, hands tucked in the pockets of his coat. Richard looked thinner, frail even, but his eyes still held the sharpness Keanu remembered. They flicked up slowly, scanning the figure at the doorway, then settling in recognition. "I didn't expect to see you," Richard said, his voice scratchy. Keanu stepped forward without a word and pulled up the chair beside the bed. "You're a hard man to reach," he said softly. A dry smile touched Richard's face. "Collapsed in the middle of a boardroom. It's not how I pictured retirement." Keanu looked at him for a moment. "I didn't come here to revisit the past." "Then why are you here?" Richard asked. "To offer something," Keanu said. "Something no one ever gave my mother." Richard blinked. "I'm not here to collect apologies," Keanu continued. "I'm here because, despite everything, I believe people deserve a path forward, if they want it." Richard looked away. "You could have destroyed us," he said, "and you didn't." "I didn't need to," Keanu replied. "The truth did that." A long silence followed. Finally, Richard spoke again, his voice softer now. "She saved us, you know. Persephone." I never said it out loud, not once. Keanu nodded slowly. "She knew." Richard's eyes turned glassy. "We were too proud to give her credit. I let my children grow up believing power meant never saying thank you." He coughed, struggling for breath, then steadied himself. "And then, I watched them. Miranda, Colin, turn that pride into cruelty." Keanu didn't flinch. "You taught them well," he said, not unkindly. Richard winced at the truth. "And now?" Keanu stood. "Now, I want to give them a different option." Richard watched him carefully. "What do you mean, an option?" Keanu folded his arms, pacing slowly near the edge of the hospital bed. "I'm keeping Vermilion, the company, the assets, the name. But I'm not turning it into another trophy on the shelf." He paused. "I'm going to rebuild it as something your family never allowed it to become." Richard raised an eyebrow. "Which is?" "A platform for the people no one sees. Filmmakers who don't speak like executives, writers who were told their trauma wasn't marketable, immigrant storytellers, disabled directors, formerly incarcerated artists, survivors." He looked up. "The ones who never had a key to the gate." Richard exhaled through his nose. "And what does this have to do with my family?" "I'm inviting them back," Keanu said. "Miranda, Colin, not as owners, not as board members, as junior partners, apprentices, if necessary." Richard blinked. "You're offering my children jobs at the company you now own?" Keanu nodded. "Yes." Richard stared at the ceiling for a long time. "I don't understand." "I know," Keanu said gently, "but I think they might." 3 days later, Miranda and Colin walked into the new Vermilion offices for the first time. They stepped into a lobby that looked nothing like the one they once ruled. Gone were the velvet ropes and framed celebrity portraits. The marble reception desk had been replaced by a reclaimed wood counter, behind which a former Vision Circle student now welcomed guests with a warm smile and a stack of screenplay submission forms. The walls were covered in sketches, storyboards, and quotes, not from critics or CEOs, but from the filmmakers themselves. One in bold letters read, "You don't have to be famous to be seen. You just have to be honest." Miranda walked slowly, heels tapping softer than they used to. She wore no diamonds, just a thin scarf and an uncertain expression. Colin was a different story, still swaggering, still wearing designer sunglasses indoors, but even he didn't say a word as Keanu greeted them in the main conference room. Isla stood quietly in the corner, her eyes flicking between them. Keanu motioned for them to sit. "I appreciate you coming," he said. Colin scoffed. We didn't come for gratitude. Good, Keanu replied, because that's not what I'm offering. Miranda's brow creased. Then why are we here? Keanu leaned forward. Because this company has always been about exclusion, he said, and I'm building something else. Not in your image, in hers. He tapped the table. My mother's. Colin leaned back, arms crossed. I want you both involved, Keanu said, but under new terms. Miranda glanced at Isla. Keanu continued. You'll work under project leads, earn your way, learn the structure we use here, open table collaboration, no boardroom politics, no celebrity leverage. Colin burst out laughing. You want me to work for you? Keanu didn't react. No. I want you to help others. You choose. Colin stood abruptly, slamming his palms on the table. This is ridiculous. You humiliated us. Now you want us to come back and smile while we sweep floors? No, Keanu said calmly, but you'll need to know how to sweep before you try to direct. Colin turned toward the door. You're doing this for revenge, he hissed. Don't pretend it's noble. Keanu stood, voice low. If this were about revenge, you wouldn't be in this room. Colin froze. This is about building something that outlasts all of us, Keanu said. I'm giving you the opportunity your father never gave anyone. A second chance. Colin didn't respond. He yanked open the door and walked out. Miranda stayed seated. She let out a slow breath and stared at her own reflection in the polished table surface. I was wrong about you, she said. Keanu said nothing. I thought kindness was weakness. That silence meant shame. She looked up at him. But you made silence into a sword. And you never raised your voice, not once. Keanu finally sat again. Then maybe you understand why I invited you. She glanced at Isla. She does. Isla gave a small nod. Miranda turned back. What would I even do here? Keanu smiled faintly. Whatever you're willing to start from. There was a long pause. Miranda stood, adjusted her scarf, then extended her hand. I don't want a spotlight, she said. Just a place to begin. He took her hand. Then you've got one. As they left the room, Isla stepped forward and looked at Keanu. That was hard to watch. Keanu nodded. It was harder to offer. She looked at him. Do you think she'll stay? He glanced out the window. I don't know, he said, but she came back through the right door. And that made all the difference. The first week, Isla came in early and stayed late. She didn't ask where to sit. She found a folding chair, pulled it up beside the editing monitors, and started watching raw footage from student films. She didn't make comments, didn't insert herself, just observed, listened, and took notes. By day 3, she was helping the younger kids frame their shots. By the end of the first month, they were asking for her by name. No one treated her like a Langford. That was the point. She carried her own coffee, rewound cables after shoots, and swept the soundstage floor without being asked. Her last name wasn't on the door and she never brought it up. When her short film, Fault Line, premiered at a local showcase, no one expected what followed. A 14-minute piece shot in grainy, handheld style, it followed a girl in a foster home who used sound as her escape. The audience was silent for nearly a full minute after the credits rolled. Then the applause began. Slow at first, then rising. By the end of the month, the short had won 2 regional youth awards and was shortlisted for an international newcomer prize. Isla didn't post about it. She didn't take interviews. Instead, she asked Keanu if she could spend her afternoons helping the orphans enrolled in Vision Circle's mentorship track. The younger children, many of whom had never touched a camera, gravitated toward her immediately. She taught them how to find light with a mirror, how to bounce sound through a pillow fort, how to tell a story without saying a word. She would kneel beside them as they built stop-motion sets out of cardboard scraps and bottle caps. She told them they were allowed to be angry. That silence didn't mean they were invisible. They believed her, because she meant it. On a quiet Thursday morning, Keanu gathered the staff in the newly renovated screening room. The walls had been lined with acoustic foam, and a soft hum of projectors and editing gear drifted from the tech booth behind the audience chairs. He stood at the front, holding a folder in one hand. "I want to tell you what our first feature at the new Vermilion is going to be," he said. People leaned in, notebooks paused, breaths held. "It's a story I never thought I'd be ready to tell," he began. "It's about someone who never stood in a spotlight, but changed the way I see the world." He opened the folder, revealing a title page. "Still Here, The Life of Kim Reeves." There was silence in the room. Keanu looked up. "She was my sister. She lived most of her life in the background, diagnosed with leukemia in her 20s. Quiet, brave. She survived longer than the doctors said she would, and in that time, she became an advocate for children recovering from abuse. She didn't want attention. She wanted safety. She gave it to every person she met." The room remained hushed. Even Isla, seated in the back row, found herself swallowing emotions she didn't expect. "This story will not be polished. It won't be glamorous. It won't star celebrities. But it will be real." He looked around the room. "We'll cast first-timers. We'll shoot on real locations. We'll bring in survivors as consultants. No one will be a prop. Everyone will be part of the story." Applause rose. Not explosive, but deep, steady, meaningful. Afterward, as the staff filtered out, Keanu noticed Richard Langford wheeling slowly down the hallway, guided by an aide. His posture was stooped, but his eyes were clear. He didn't say much anymore. Age and illness had made conversation difficult. But as he passed by the door, he paused. Keanu walked toward him. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. Then Richard raised a hand, placed it on Keanu's shoulder, and gave the smallest nod of approval. That was all. And that was enough. A week later, Miranda walked through the main floor of the foundation building, arms full of donation binders she was reorganizing for the upcoming gala. She passed one of the night shift janitors, a woman in her 50s who'd worked there long before the new ownership took over. She paused her mop and looked up at Miranda with a tilted head. "You're Langford, right?" she asked. Miranda nodded cautiously. The woman wiped her hands on her apron. "Didn't recognize you at first." Miranda gave a faint smile. "Probably better that way." The woman studied her for another moment. "You're not like you used to be." Miranda paused, then smiled, softer this time. "That's the point," she continued down the hallway, and for the first time in years, her steps felt lighter. In the following weeks, something began to shift. Not just in the Langfords, but in the building itself. Scripts started coming in from neighborhoods where screenwriting was unheard of. Grants were issued to single mothers producing documentaries on their phones. Former janitors pitched pilots. Children edited their first trailers beside professional colorists. Colin hadn't returned, but no one spoke ill of him. The door remained open, should he ever choose to walk through it. And Isla, she became something more than an intern. She became a bridge. She introduced students to camera rigs. She brought snacks to late-night editing sessions. She helped translate feedback into encouragement. One afternoon, Keanu passed her in the courtyard as she taught a child how to frame a shot using a cardboard cutout as a lens. She looked up and smiled. "You never said if you liked the title I submitted," she said. Keanu paused. "Which one?" "For the new banner we're adding under Vermilion. You know, the youth wing." He tilted his head. "Remind me?" She grinned. "Brightwood Rising." He stared at her, the name washing over him like sunlight. "That's good," he said. "That's really good." She looked back at the child and adjusted the angle of the mock lens. He watched them for a moment longer, then turned and walked back into the building. Because the story was already unfolding, and for the first time in a long time, it wasn't about who had the most power. It was about who gave the most away, and who, despite every reason not to, chose to stay. The letter arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. It was handwritten, the envelope addressed carefully in blue ink, with no return address except a single word written across the back flap in looping script: gratitude. Keanu opened it at his desk, where he had been reviewing a new round of student submissions. He unfolded the paper slowly, recognizing the elegance of the writing before he'd read a single word. Something about it felt familiar, not in the words, but in the feeling behind them. He began to read. "Dear Mr. Reeves, you don't know me, though I knew someone you loved. 20 years ago, I was a nurse on the oncology floor of St. John's Medical Center. I worked the night shift. I had a patient named Kim, your sister. I remember her soft laugh, her patience with the other patients, how she folded the hospital blankets even when she was too tired to sit up straight. She never talked about herself, but she talked about you. She said you were a protector, that you didn't need to speak loudly to be heard, that you believed people could be healed in more ways than just the medical kind. She told me one night, while the halls were quiet and she could finally sleep, 'My brother wants to make something that lasts longer than pain.' I never forgot that. Years later, my own child was diagnosed with a rare vascular disease. We fought for years in and out of hospitals, but last month she went into remission. During recovery, we sat together and watched a short film called Still Here. I didn't know who made it. I didn't recognize your name right away, but halfway through, I saw the story, and I knew it was Kim. My daughter asked me, 'Who was that woman?' And I said, 'Someone real.'" Keanu paused. His hands were still. Then he continued reading. "Since then, my daughter has been writing. Every day. She keeps a journal with sketches of people she meets, pieces of dialogue she hears, fragments of dreams. She says she wants to tell stories like the one you told. Stories about the people who don't get endings, just moments of truth. She asked me if I thought she could ever be a writer, and I told her yes. Because I saw how one story changed her. Because I watched her sit up straighter after that film, like she was no longer just surviving, but beginning. So this is me saying thank you. For her. For Kim. For doing what your sister said you would. You made something that lasted longer than pain, with warmth. Emily Reyes, RN, Oncology Night Shift, St. John's Medical Center." Keanu sat in silence, the letter resting in his hands like it belonged to more than just him. The name, Emily Reyes. He remembered her now. She had been there during Kim's final weeks. Soft-spoken, tireless. The kind of presence that knew when to speak and when not to. She brought chamomile tea during overnight shifts, and once read Kim poetry when she couldn't sleep. And now, her daughter had seen that story, had been moved by it, had chosen to create because of it. He turned the letter over. No phone number, no email, just that final signature, with warmth. It was enough. Across the room, May entered, holding a folder of production updates. She paused when she saw the look on his face. "You okay?" she asked softly. Keanu nodded. "Just read something. Good or bad." He handed her the letter without a word. She read it, her expression changing slowly from curiosity to reverence. When she finished, she folded it neatly and placed it on the desk. "That's a loop," she said. He looked at her. "Your sister helps a nurse survive the hardest part of her job. 20 years later, that nurse's daughter survives something just as hard and finds herself in a story about the woman who once needed kindness." She smiled gently. "Life folds back on itself sometimes, but only when people are paying attention." Keanu looked out the window. The city outside moved in its usual rhythm, fast, distracted, loud. But in this moment, everything felt quiet. "I want to meet her," he said. May nodded. "We'll find her." He leaned back in his chair. His eyes drifted to the plaque above the door, the one Isla had helped install after the fellowship launched. A story can save a life, even if it's your own. Later that afternoon, he pulled an unused notebook from the shelf, a thick, blank one. He opened it to the first page. He didn't write a title, just a question. What else can we make that lasts? He thought about Kim, about Persephone, about Daniel and Dana and Malik and Isla, about all the children sitting somewhere in a hospital room or on a curb or behind a dusty window, waiting for a story that might carry them forward. He flipped to the second page and began writing. A week later, a visitor arrived at Vision Circle's front desk. She was 13, wearing oversized glasses and a denim jacket covered in hand-drawn patches. She carried a purple notebook so full of paper it barely stayed closed. "Hi," she said to the receptionist. "My name is Marisol Reyes. I think I'm supposed to meet Mr. Reeves?" Keanu came out moments later, wearing the same calm expression he always wore, one that softened when he saw her. "You must be the writer," he said. Marisol blushed. "I'm still learning." He crouched down to her level. "We all are." She handed him the notebook. "These are my stories. Some are sad, some are weird." "Good," he said. "Sad and weird makes them honest." She smiled. He led her through the halls, pointing out different production rooms, sound stages, a wall of framed student short films. "This is where you'll start, if you'd like." She stopped. "I can really stay?" "You're already here," he said. In the days that followed, Marisol became a fixture in the building. She sat in on editing sessions, wrote poetry in the corners of rehearsal rooms, helped Isla tape storyboards to the walls, and every day she wrote something new. Not because she wanted to be famous, but because she had something to say, and someone had finally told her it mattered. The circle hadn't just closed, it had opened, and everything they'd built was now breathing forward, one story at a time. The announcement came quietly. No press conference, no streaming event, no celebrity sponsor, just a single post on the Vision Circle website. The Vivian Reeves Memorial Fellowship, a program dedicated to elevating young voices from low-income backgrounds who carry stories the world needs to hear. It was funded personally by Keanu. The name was chosen without debate. Vivian had always gone by her middle name, Kim, in public, but this was different. This was something for the record, for the archives, for the truth. He wanted her full name remembered. The fellowship offered more than money. It gave students a full year of support, tuition assistance, equipment access, housing stipends, and hands-on mentorship with working filmmakers. Applicants didn't need a portfolio. They didn't need a letter from someone with influence. They just needed a story they couldn't let go of. Isla helped build it from the ground up. She met with young writers, toured community centers, and helped design the interview questions. She insisted they ask things like, "What's a story you're afraid to tell? What's something you've survived that you haven't named yet? Where does your voice live when no one's listening?" She called the program a mirror, one she never had until Keanu handed it to her. When he invited her to co-chair the fellowship committee, she didn't hesitate. "I'm not here to repay you," she said. "I'm here to pass it forward." The response was immediate. Letters poured in from across the country, some handwritten, some emailed from public library computers. Stories came from kids in shelters, from sons of construction workers, daughters of immigrant cooks, foster teens, student mothers, formerly incarcerated youth. They didn't ask for fame, they asked to be heard, and for the first time, they were. The fellowship was barely a month old when something unexpected happened. Richard Langford called for a meeting. He was still confined to a wheelchair, but his presence was quieter now, less commanding, more reflective. Isla met him in the courtyard of the foundation, under the shaded pergola where many of the younger students gathered between classes. She wheeled him there herself. Keanu arrived a few minutes later, a folder tucked beneath his arm. He didn't expect anything, but Richard did. "I want to donate," he said, before pleasantries had even finished. "My entire estate," Keanu blinked. "You don't need to." Richard held up a hand. "Yes, I do." He looked out at the students, some rehearsing lines, others filming test shots, laughing at playback on cracked monitors. "This," Richard said, "is what I thought Vermilion was supposed to be, and I buried it chasing marble floors and magazine covers." He looked back at Keanu. "My name doesn't need to be on anything. I'm not doing it for that. Keanu was quiet. I just want to give the last thing I built to someone who will use it better. Keanu reached across the table and shook his hand. No lawyers, no ceremony, just understanding. 2 weeks later, the legal paperwork was complete. The Keanu Reeves Memorial Fellowship now had a permanent trust fund large enough to support hundreds of students for decades. The news didn't make headlines, but it echoed in every letter that arrived afterward, every script written in the margins of bus schedules, every audition tape recorded on borrowed phones. Meanwhile, changes were happening elsewhere, too. Colin Langford had disappeared for a while after storming out of the meeting with Keanu. No one expected him to return. Then one afternoon, Isla received an email from an unrecognized address. The subject line read, "I'm trying." The message was short. "Isla, I started therapy, voluntarily, twice a week. I didn't think I'd survive this fall, but I did. And I keep thinking about what you said, that no one should inherit cruelty. I don't know what I'll do next. But I know what I won't do anymore. I won't build anything unless it helps someone else. I'm not ready to talk to the others yet, but I wanted you to know. Tell him if you want, or don't. Colin." Isla didn't forward it, but she printed it, folded it, and handed it to Keanu with no words. He read it slowly, then nodded. "No one's beyond reach," he said quietly. Miranda, on the other hand, had returned fully. She didn't try to reclaim power. Instead, she asked how she could serve. It was May who suggested it. "Hey, don't you teach?" Miranda had never taught a day in her life. She had once called teachers the dreamers who gave up, but something inside her had shifted. She visited a local community college and offered to guest lecture. The class was on screenwriting fundamentals, and she brought nothing but her old notebooks, redlined studio memos, and a story about the first time she rejected a film that later won Sundance. The students listened, not because she was famous, but because she was honest. That one class turned into a semester, then an offer. Miranda now taught 3 nights a week at 2 campuses, breaking down structure, symbolism, and mistakes she swore she'd never repeat. She asked students to bring their ugliest stories, the ones they were most ashamed of. She called those the seeds of cinema. One night, after a long class, she stayed behind to help a student whose screenplay was about an estranged father and a silent daughter. As they packed up their notes, the student turned to her and said, "You talk like someone who lost something." Miranda smiled. "I did," she said, "but I'm building it back, frame by frame." At the foundation, the Keanu Reeves Memorial Wall continued to grow. Each fellow's name was etched into it, year by year. No photos, just initials, titles, and quotes from their submitted stories. Underneath them, a single line was carved in silver. "Legacy isn't what you leave behind, it's what you set free." And with every passing day, another name was added. Another voice stepped forward. Another truth took flight. The legacy had not been inherited, it had been chosen. The press event was held at a converted art space on the Lower East Side. No red carpet, no glittering chandeliers, just string lights draped across exposed beams, foldable chairs, and a small stage framed with handmade banners sewn by students of the foundation. The buzz in the room was undeniable. Press, critics, community leaders, former rivals, first-time filmmakers, teenagers from youth shelters, all packed together, all waiting. Keanu stood backstage, adjusting the cuffs of the charcoal suit he'd worn on a very different night years ago. The same night the Langfords once laughed him out of their penthouse. That version of him was gone, but the memory of that night still stood behind his eyes, like a reminder. Across the room, Miranda Langford sat in the front row beside her father, Richard, whose wheelchair had been fitted with new cushions by the Foundation's facilities team. The air was thick with expectation, but also something softer. Curiosity. Openness. Isla stood to the side, holding a binder of notes she wouldn't need. The room dimmed. Then Keanu stepped onto the stage. He didn't look at the cameras, he looked at the people. He didn't need a script. "Thank you for coming," he said. His voice was calm, certain. "We started as strangers," he continued. "Then, some of us became adversaries. There were moments I won't forget, where I was made to feel like I didn't belong, that my story, my work, my purpose was less." He looked at Richard, then at Miranda. "And for a while, I believed that." He paused. "But now, we're something else. Not friends, not enemies. We are learners, builders. We are the kind of people who've been humbled enough to start over and bold enough to help others do the same." The room was silent. Then came the applause. Real, earned. The event transitioned into the premiere without fanfare. No commercial break, no speeches from executives or branding statements, just a smooth fade into black, and then a single title card appeared. "Still Here." Inspired by the life of Keanu Reeves. The lights stayed down. The crowd hushed. What followed wasn't a movie in the traditional sense. It was something quieter, more intimate. Shot with handheld cameras, the story moved with the rhythm of breath, honest, fragile, and full of silences that said more than dialogue ever could. Kim's journey was portrayed not through diagnosis charts or monologues, but through her choices, comforting another patient when she could barely sit up herself, writing letters she never mailed, folding sheets precisely in a room no longer hers. She was played by Noor Al-Hadi, a first-time actress who had come to the U.S. just 2 years earlier, with no training, no headshots, just lived experience. The film never showed a hospital name, never used dramatic music to build emotion. Instead, it trusted the story to do the work. And it did. The script, written by Maya Jombrowski, was simple and unpolished in the best way. It carried the emotional weight of someone who had survived things without needing to explain them. Isla's direction was confident and tender. She never overreached. She let quiet moments breathe. She let stillness carry meaning. The shots weren't technically perfect, but they were deeply human. When the final frame faded out, no one moved. Then, from the front row, a quiet sound. It was Richard Langford, clapping slowly. Others joined. Then, everyone. A standing ovation rose like a tide, not choreographed, not showy, but from the chest, from the ribs, from people who had been cracked open by something real. Tears streamed down Isla's face. Keanu didn't stand. He just watched. Watched what his sister's legacy had become. Watched the circle close. 3 months later, Still Here premiered at Cannes. It was the quietest entry on the list. No billboards, no celebrity endorsements, just a plain title and a paragraph in the brochure that read, "A debut feature by Isla Langford, inspired by a real-life advocate, featuring first-time performers," the industry whispered. Who was she? Why this story? Would it even matter? The screening was held at the Grand Theatre Lumiere, the most prestigious theater in the festival. Journalists took their seats. Executives folded their arms. Isla sat in the back row, holding her breath. Keanu was beside her, his presence like an anchor, quiet but steady. Maya sat on her other side, holding a notebook she never opened. Her hands trembled through the entire screening, and when the film ended, silence. Then applause. Then more, and more. A full standing ovation. 8 minutes long. Some said 9. The official count didn't matter. What mattered was that it didn't stop, not because the crowd was told to clap, but because they didn't want to stop. That night, Still Here won Best Picture. Isla stepped on stage, overwhelmed, shaking. She held the trophy in both hands like it was something sacred. She spoke softly. "This is not my story," she said. "It belongs to someone who didn't live to tell it, and someone who believed in me when no one else did." She looked at Keanu and the crowd. "Thank you for giving me the space to learn, to fail, to rise." This is for every voice that was almost erased. Later that night, back at the modest apartment she was renting during the festival, they gathered. No velvet ropes, no champagne towers, just a few chairs, a box of pizza, and silence. They passed around Kim's journal, the one she'd written during her final days. Keanu read a line aloud. "Even when my body gives up, I hope my words walk forward." They had. Everyone in the room was proof, and none of them had done it alone. That night, as the city slept outside their windows, Keanu sat by himself at the edge of the balcony, the trophy resting beside him, untouched. Miranda came out quietly and sat next to him. "She would have been proud," she said. "She was never about pride," Keanu replied. "She was about meaning." Miranda nodded. Then she got it. They watched the stars for a long while. Below, can lights flickered across the harbor. Cameras still flashed, but no one in their room needed them. Eventually, Miranda spoke again. "We can't undo what we did," she said. "No," Keanu replied, "but we can tell the truth about it." She turned to him. "Do you forgive us?" He thought for a moment, then said simply, "I do." He stood. "I have to, so we can move forward." Miranda looked up at the sky. "I never thought forgiveness would feel like this." "It doesn't always feel like relief," Keanu said. "Sometimes it feels like work. But it's the good kind," and together they walked back inside. Because the story wasn't ending, it was just turning the page. The courthouse was quiet that morning. No press, no press release. Just a modest family courtroom tucked between larger buildings, its wood paneling worn and its chairs creaking from years of stories far more complicated than this one. Keanu sat beside Isla, both of them dressed in simple black. Her father had passed just 3 weeks earlier, complications from a stroke he never fully recovered from. Though their relationship had been strained, the loss was still real. Grief moved through her not in waves but in silences, spaces she didn't know how to fill. She hadn't asked for anything, but Keanu had offered something. "I don't want to replace anyone," he'd said gently, "but I'd be honored if you'd let me continue beside you. Officially." And now they were here. The judge was soft-spoken, respectful, and kind. "This is unusual," she said, flipping through the paperwork, "but not unwelcome. You're both adults. This isn't about guardianship, it's about choosing family." Isla smiled faintly, the first smile in weeks that reached her eyes. Keanu reached over and gently held her hand. The judge nodded. "Well then," she said, stamping the final page. "As of today, Isla Langford is now Isla Langford Reeves." The gavel dropped. Not for drama, just for recognition. Isla let out a slow breath. Keanu smiled at her. Not with pride, but with warmth. With quiet joy. On the sidewalk outside, May waited with a paper bag full of warm croissants. She hugged them both without a word, handing Isla a coffee and patting Keanu on the back. "You two," she said, "are officially trouble." Isla laughed, and for the first time in days, Keanu heard in her voice something that had been missing since the funeral: hope. Not the loud kind, the kind that stays. The seasons passed quickly after that. The foundation grew, not in size, but in strength. New fellows arrived every quarter, each carrying a voice no one had heard before. Keanu and Isla ran everything side by side, balancing vision with execution, heart with structure. Isla became a director, then a producer. She still taught workshops, still answered student emails at midnight, still stayed late after rehearsals with kids who were scared to go home. Keanu didn't stop either. He reviewed every grant application himself, gave final sign-off on every documentary pitch, and checked in on alumni like they were family. Because to him, they were. One spring, Keanu received a card in the mail, handmade, folded unevenly, written in crayon. It was from a 7-year-old in one of the outreach programs. Inside, the message read, "Thank you for being the man who finds lost voices." He kept it in his wallet. 2 years after Isla became Isla Langford Reeves, she told Keanu she was engaged. His reaction was simple. He hugged her, told her he was proud, and asked when he'd be meeting the person bold enough to walk beside you. The man's name was Elias. He was quiet, kind, and fiercely intelligent. A youth social worker with no interest in fame and a talent for listening. He and Isla had met during a panel discussion at a shelter for displaced teens. Their first conversation was about grief. Their second was about hope. Their third lasted until sunrise. Keanu approved immediately, not because of Elias's resume, but because of the way Isla laughed when she talked about him. It was full, open, different. Plans began slowly. Nothing extravagant, no destination wedding, no luxury sponsors. Just a small outdoor ceremony near the garden behind the foundation building, where students now cultivated vegetables, herbs, and wildflowers between editing their films. Everyone would be invited: students, faculty, friends, and surprisingly, the entire Langford family. By now, things had shifted. Miranda had become a regular face at local film schools. She still wore elegance, but now she carried humility with it. She had begun mentoring women directors from marginalized communities and had recently helped secure housing for 2 of her own students. Colin, too, had changed. After 2 full years of sobriety, he had returned not to business, but to service. He worked part-time at a recovery center and helped lead support circles for men rebuilding relationships with their families. His voice was softer now. His temper rarely showed. He no longer looked for cameras. He just showed up. On the day of the wedding, the air smelled like jasmine and orange blossom. The ceremony was held under a canopy of linen and vines, surrounded by rows of handmade benches. Each seat was marked not with a name tag, but with a quote from a student. Keanu stood at the center in a tailored gray suit, hands folded calmly as the ceremony began. Isla appeared at the end of the path, radiant in a simple ivory dress. She didn't carry flowers. Instead, she carried a small journal. Kim's journal, the one that had inspired everything. As she reached him, he extended his arm. "You ready?" he asked. She smiled. "You always ask that when I already am." Together, they walked down the aisle. There were no tears, just smiles. Full, peaceful ones. When they reached the front, Keanu stepped back and took his seat beside Miranda and Richard. The old man didn't speak much anymore, but his eyes were wide and clear, and he never stopped watching Isla with something that almost looked like awe. The ceremony was brief, honest, written by Isla and Elias themselves. No long speeches, just promises. After the vows, as guests moved to the reception tables, lined with mismatched chairs and hand-painted placemats, Colin took the stage. Everyone held their breath. He cleared his throat, noticeably nervous. Then he spoke. "I don't deserve this, Mike," he began, "but I asked for it. Because this isn't just about Isla and Elias. It's about second chances. It's about people who should have been enemies but became something better. It's about forgiveness that shows up even when it's not asked for." He paused. "I used to think strength was loud. I used to think family meant being the one on top. But I've learned that real strength is quiet. It's showing up over and over even after you've broken things." He turned to Keanu. "You showed us how to do that. Not by yelling, not by winning, but by healing." There was silence. Then applause. Not for the performance, but for the growth. Later, backstage, as the sun dipped behind the city, Miranda found Keanu standing alone beside the makeshift curtain. She walked up, still in her soft blue dress, and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You saved all of us," she said quietly. He shook his head. "No," he replied. "You saved yourselves. I just kept the door open." She nodded. "Then thank you for leaving it unlocked." They hugged, an embrace without apology, without tension, just understanding. And somewhere nearby, a song began to play and people started to dance. Not perfectly, but honestly. The kind of dancing that only happens when people know who they are and have forgiven who they were. The kind that lasts. The screening room had changed over the years. It used to be a storage space. Dusty, dark, lined with broken monitors and stacked boxes of unused tripods. Now it glowed. The walls were covered in mural paintings made by students. Stories played in loops across 5 small screens, while folding chairs were arranged in gentle rows. A patchwork rug covered the middle of the floor, where children could sit barefoot if they wanted to. It was the end of a student showcase, the final hour of a long day. The youngest group, ages 8 to 10, had just finished premiering their short films. There were stories about monsters under beds, about magical bicycles, about grandmothers who could time travel and cats who ran local newspapers. Keanu sat quietly in the back row. He wasn't there to judge. He wasn't even introduced. He was just present. Beside him sat May, sipping lukewarm tea. Isla leaned against the wall with a clipboard in her hand and a proud look on her face. The last short had just ended, and the lights were slowly rising again. The children squirmed with excitement, whispering to each other, pointing at the makeshift screen as if they'd just seen their futures projected onto it. Then, a girl with a blue ribbon in her braids turned around in her seat and looked directly at Keanu. She must have recognized him. Or maybe she'd just sensed something in the way he watched. She stood up and walked toward him without hesitation. She couldn't have been older than 9. "I liked the one with the ghost who tells jokes," she said. Keanu smiled. "Me too. That one made me laugh." The girl tilted her head. "Are you a teacher?" "Sometimes," he replied. She nodded, then said with complete sincerity, "One day, I'm going to make a movie that changes the world." Keanu's throat tightened. "I believe you will," he said. And he meant it. The girl grinned at Keanu, then turned and ran back to her friends, who erupted into giggles and high fives like they'd just won an Oscar. The moment was small, but it burned itself into Keanu's memory, not because of the words, because of the certainty in her voice. He stayed in his seat for a while, letting the room empty out around him. Students collected USB drives and complimented each other's color grading. Parents hovered nearby with proud smiles. One kid asked May if they could screen their film on real movie screens next time. She promised they'd try. The projector hummed one last time and powered down. The room dimmed. Isla walked over and sat beside Keanu. "Still your favorite part?" she asked. He nodded. "Always." She looked down at her clipboard, now marked with notes, suggestions, and one small doodle in the margin of a cat with a camera. "Do you ever think about how it started?" she asked. "How everything that built this place came from a dinner invitation meant to humiliate you?" Keanu took a long breath, then slowly let it out. "I do," he said. "All the time." Isla studied his face. "Does it still hurt?" "Not in the same way," he answered. "It's like a scar that doesn't ache anymore. But I trace it sometimes, just to remember what it taught me." She smiled at that. Behind them, Miranda entered, helping Richard through the side door. His wheelchair rolled slowly, but his hands were steady as he made his way to the edge of the room. He watched the students laugh and clean up popcorn. His eyes softened in that way they now often did. Less judgment, more memory. Colin arrived next, carrying boxes of equipment and offering congratulations to a shy 10-year-old who had recorded all of her film's sound on a phone app. He was in his element now, not leading, not dominating, just contributing. The family had changed. They weren't trying to win anymore, they were trying to serve. Keanu rose from his chair and moved toward the exit, pausing at the mural one of the fellows had painted on the back wall. It was abstract. Blues and golds swirled together like rivers colliding. But if you looked close, you could see what it was. A circle. Not closed, just bending, And within the circle, tiny brushstrokes formed a quote, barely visible unless you knew to look. A story doesn't end with its final word, it ends when it's no longer shared. He touched the edge of the mural gently with his fingers, then stepped out into the hallway. Outside, the sky was beginning to dim. Evening light bled across the concrete courtyard, where students were now sitting on benches, sharing snacks, reviewing notes, teasing each other about whose short got the most laughs. Keanu walked through them unnoticed. He liked it that way. Back in his office, he sat at the desk, pulled out a small drawer, and removed a letter. It was the original one from Emily Reyes, the nurse who'd cared for his sister. The paper was worn now, the edges soft from folding and unfolding, but he kept it close. He read it again, slowly, not because he had forgotten what it said, but because it anchored him. You made something that lasted longer than pain. He placed the letter back in its sleeve, then picked up a framed photo from the desk. It was a picture of Kim smiling on a sunlit morning, wearing an oversized sweater and holding a film reel like it was a newborn. He closed his eyes for a moment and let the quiet settle. A knock at the door stirred him. Isla stepped in again, holding a USB stick. "Final cut of the next doc," she said. "About the brothers from the Bronx who built a community recording studio." Keanu reached for it, but she pulled it back with a grin. "You'll cry," she warned. "Good," he said. She placed it in his hand. Then, as if remembering something, she turned back one more time. "You know," she said, "I never got to tell you what I thought that dinner was really about." He tilted his head. "I don't think they meant to destroy you," she said. "I think they meant to measure you, and when you didn't break, they saw someone they didn't understand." She smiled again. "And now, you're the one building the table." He looked down at the USB stick. "Maybe. But this time, no one eats alone." She nodded, turned, and left him with the film. He sat back, placed the stick on his desk, and looked out the window, where dusk was falling in soft streaks of gold and violet. His voice came softly into the room, quiet, reflective, and full. Not out loud, but within. "The dinner that was meant to destroy me became the beginning of something beautiful, because love really is stronger than hate, and stories, when shared in truth, become the light." He stood slowly and walked back toward the screening room. Because the night wasn't over, and someone else's story was just beginning.